Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Contractor Radio. You know us, we're always trying to bring you cool content and new things for you to think about that you can add to your rapport or just broaden your horizons or at least give you some entertaining content to listen to here at Contractor Radio. So this week, we're going to be talking to Taylor Bezek from the C3 group. Now, Taylor's got a lot of really interesting responsibilities over there and what he does, and he pretty important to those folks. And so I'll let him explain a little bit more about kind of where he's from and what he does. But today we're going to learn a little bit about what we need to know as salespeople about insurance policies that can help us during the sales process. Oftentimes we think about insurance policies from the standpoint of what's covered and what's not covered. And oftentimes that's stuff that's not part of our sales process. It's almost more on the back end or on the administrative or on the supplementing side of things. But as it turns out, the more we know as salespeople, the better we are to service our clients. So there's another component we're going to talk a little bit too, that we don't necessarily need to be a PA or a lawyer in order to address a little bit of these concepts with a customer. And I'm excited to get Taylor's information on kind of what we do and how we can operate and how these things can help us while we're at the door trying to service our clients. Now, before we jump into that information, I'm going to pause real quick to give a little love to our sponsors. And so here we go.
The Atlas Pro Plus Contractor Program is designed to help you build your business. It gives you tools and resources, training, industry insights, bonus structures, technical knowledge, the brand power and science of 3M Scotchgard, and what we think is the best product and warranty in the industry. Become part of the family that is succeeding and growing their businesses.
We went from nobody ever heard of us to the #1 roofing company in our region.
And we've gone from 12 roofs a year to 20, 35, and we did over 400 last year.
We're on track right now to do 1,000 roofs this year.
You'll begin earning Atlas bucks and rewards as you move up to even greater reward levels. Become an Atlas Pro today.
Welcome back to this episode of Contractor Radio, where we're talking with Taylor Bezek of the C3 Group. Taylor, how you doing, brother?
I'm doing great, Nathan. Thank you for having me today.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. Talking with some of the folks over there, they said you were the guy that we should have a conversation with, and you've got some really cool and unique information for us. So I'm excited to hear some of that stuff. But tell us a little bit about your background, where you came from. Who is Taylor Bezek?
Yeah, so I got into this industry actually via my cousin, who was a restoration contractor here in Denver, where I currently live. I was living in Seattle, pursuing possibly going to grad school, when he called me up and was like, "Hey, I got a job for you where you can make good money and work, whatever hours you want." Unbeknownst to me, that was knocking doors and selling roofs. So that was that was my indoctrination by fire into the industry. And I did that for about 2 summers with him. It was good. And through that process, I met Matt Behrens and his then partner, Mike Lindhurst at C3 Group. And in pretty short order, I was like, man, I'd really like to be on that side of it and actually interacting directly with carrier representatives and working on interpreting policy and advocating directly for clients and contractors for that matter. So I jumped on with C3 Group back in 2012, summer of 2012, I believe. And at that time it was 3 people. It was Matt, Mike, and his brother Andrew, who is our Xactimate guru and surgeon. And the rest is history. We've been really fortunate to have success in the industry, mostly due to, Andrew Behrens and his team's efforts in writing good, solid estimates. And then, some of the stuff we've been able to be on the leading edge of with regard to policy interpretation and working with carriers in that regard.
Awesome. So what is your specific position at C3? What do you do for those folks?
So right now, well, as of most recently, as of probably, I think it was February of this year, I switched over to the vice president of sales role at C3 Group. And in that capacity, my main tasks are reviewing, qualifying, and then approving or denying, claims that we want to take on and possibly help with. So that's, vetting damage, vetting policy, setting expectations with clients, and ultimately being the liaison for us taking on and intaking a claim that we ultimately think that we can help with. On top of that, it's doing stuff like this and, the shaking hands and kissing babies stuff, and, spreading the good gospel of public adjusting, I guess.
There we go. All right. So, I kind of want to set the table a little bit for this conversation, right? And one of the reasons is because anytime contractors start talking about policy, it can get a little bit dicey, right? And so I think that for a lot of us, in order to just avoid the concept of running into a problem whatsoever, we try as little as possible to talk about policy. And so maybe we don't educate ourselves as much on that. But before we kind of talk about that, I want to talk a little bit about like this whole UPPA thing, and maybe set some guardrails for our conversation on this.
Sure. Yeah. And to lend some context there, I mean, we've always been vehemently opposed to UPPA and really any legislation or initiative that seeks to divide and alienate contractors from, their clients, the insureds, especially in restoration insurance claims instances. And UPPA aims to do that. They've framed insurance carriers and carrier lobbyists and interest groups have framed contractors as a conflict of interest, thinking that they're going around, overestimating and putting fluff in and, basically fraudulently inflating these claims, which is, so far from the truth. I can't even begin to explain that. And really what carriers have been doing is they've been using Xactimate, which is a platform that's made to be a market price aggregator in the middle of the road. The middle 50% of the market is supposed to be what Xactimate represents. They're using that as the ceiling and trying to manipulate that down. So basically making the median the top and working contractors down from there. All that aside, we think UPPA is pretty ridiculous. And, at the end of the day, the policy is the primary governing document that is going to pay the insured and ultimately pay you as a contractor to do the work. So to go and try to extricate contractors from having any conversation about what should be done, within the context of the policy, it's really tough, and it really hamstrings what your ability is to do on site when you're trying to advocate for your client and advocate for the best practice in repairing a certain type of damage from a covered peril.
Yeah.
So while you cannot interpret and try to advocate for coverage while you're on site and talking directly, so if you're meeting with an insurance carrier representative, you need to stay away from, saying things about, what the policy covers or what should be afforded, and stick specifically to what you're seeing as damage and what you believe is compensatory to appropriately repair said damage. And as long as you stick to that, you're fine. But really that's only when you're interacting with an insurance carrier representative, on site or over the phone or something like that.
Okay. All right. So those are some pretty good guardrails. I like that. Like you don't ever want to advocate that somebody do something that's going to get them in trouble, right? But you and I think, are kind of on the same page there, that, the same way you don't want to get alienated, having a patient get alienated from their doctor when the two of them are really all about, health, between your contractor and your homeowner. That's a critical relationship, making sure that the homeowner is getting everything that they need and the contractor is being taken care of in order to do that. So we're on the same page there. Now, you had brought up this concept or this topic of policy-driven sales, which I think is an interesting concept. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so what I mean by that is that, one, setting good expectations with your insured so that you guys have a unified front throughout the process. And two, maximizing your return on investment for your time as a contractor or contractor salesperson. And, it really boils down to the two sides of variables that there are in a given claim. And one is the damage. I mean, and, that's when you're out soliciting and you're looking at properties, your eyes light up when you see really significant exhibited damage on site, because you know that there's not going to be a huge argument about the causation or the extent of damage. That's one major hurdle to get over, and that's great. And then you can come down and talk to your insurance and say, hey, this is absolutely damaged. It's going to need to be taken care of. The other hurdle is making sure that the insured has a policy that's going to compensate them or indemnify them to the full extent to get the work that's damaged done, or to repair the damage that's been done and get them paid appropriately for it. And, what we're starting to see as public adjusters who, work nationwide, is we're starting to see a lot of, kind of concerning policy provisions, deductibles and endorsements that are limiting the amount of possible, financial indemnification that an insured can get. In some cases, between, policy provisions, they're effectively writing out certain perils. So, when I say a policy-driven sales approach, I mean, getting in front of it and talking to your insured, to your client, and say, hey, the damage is there, but let us take a look at your policy and let's hypothesize what the practical application of this policy is within the context of the damage that we're seeing. And let you know if we even think it's a smart thing to file a claim or not. Because, if you can come out there and differentiate yourself in that regard and say, hey, I'm not going to just come out here and tell you to file a claim, say your insurance company is going to pay for it, all you owe is your deductible, and then when it doesn't happen, walk away. I'm going to give you a realistic picture of what you're looking at as far as an insurance claim from, an indemnification standpoint.
Yeah. Okay. So in taking these things into consideration, my first question is kind of right off the bat. I think if any sales guy here, and that's kind of like, okay, what are some of the key things that we need to know about insurance policies? What should we be looking for?
So I would always say, if you can, try to get a hold of the declarations page. So it's basically the paraphrased policy without all of the, the fine print, common policy conditions, all this other stuff. While that is important, you get a really good snapshot of what the policy covers from the declarations pages. And that's gonna list whether it's replacement cost value policy, which you want an RCV policy first and foremost. I think most people, at this point know what that is. You want to know what the limits of liability are. You want to know what the deductible is. And that's important because what we're seeing a lot and pervasive throughout the industry, both residential and commercial, are these increasingly high percentage deductibles. Right. And then also in hurricane states, named storm deductibles that are, exorbitantly high. So, while you might have a $1,000 deductible for everything, you'll say, except wind and hail, and that'll be a 5% deductible. And that's 5% of the insured value of the property. So 5% of your total limits of liability. So it's really important to look at that, because if you're sitting there and you're talking to an insurance, say, Joe Homeowner, it's like, there's great damage up here. What's your deductible? And they go $1,000. All right, well, your only financial obligation in this process is $1,000. Your insurance company is going to take care of the rest. Well, fast forward, all the work's done, you're collecting, you're getting the deductible. And they're going, well, it's actually 5,000. Now it's a much bigger conversation. It's 5 times as high as they originally thought. Yeah,
and I mean, you want to talk about stepping in it as a salesperson? Like, you look like a fool, right? They're going to wonder if they got lied to, or so that's even a little bit of CYA, for yourself, because if you're getting through this process and you take great care of the customer, and all of a sudden they've got this $5,000 deductible when you kind of telling them it was only $1,000. Good luck getting some referrals from that.
Yep. And then after that, you look at the endorsements. So usually right after the limits liability deductible, if it's an HOA or commercial property, you'll have like the roster of locations. You'll have a list of endorsements, and it'll be a bunch of numbers with a short paraphrased description by each one. And while you probably, if you see something concerning, you'd want to get the full policy and read all of the endorsements, but really what you want to look for in those are anything that applies to excluding, limiting, ACV, any stuff like that would pertain to, building envelope or whatever you're dealing with regard to the restoration of the damage claimed. So what we're seeing a lot of, especially in Texas, and it's creeping up to Colorado, and we're seeing some of it in Minnesota, Iowa, so it's happening across the board, are ACV endorsements on roofs over a certain age, or ACV endorsements on roofs of a certain type of material. So, that can significantly impact, the claim, because it's an actual cash value endorsement, meaning, for example, say you have a 30-year asphalt shingle and you have an ACV endorsement on any roof over 10 years old or 15 years old. We'll just put 15 out there. So if the roofs are older than 15 years old, you're getting 50 cents on the dollar for that material, and that is it. And it's really important to look at what the definition of that is. So if you do see that endorsement, what is the definition of roof surface? Is it the shingles? Is it the shingles, nails, felt, sheathing? And then you also have to be cognizant about whether or not the carrier is going to try to depreciate labor. So it starts to get a little bit more nuanced in how you estimate and how you sell this to a client to say, hey, you're getting the depreciated value of this material, and it's halfway through its serviceable life. So on your best day, you're getting 50 cents on the dollar for X, Y, and Z with regard to the roof surface, we're seeing that a lot. The other one is a cosmetic endorsement. So carriers will place a cosmetic endorsement on roof surfaces. Pretty much every metal roof has a cosmetic endorsement these days. Right. And the spirit of that is, if there's not a hole through it, we're not going to pay for it. And you really got to, again, look at the definition of what cosmetic means and what functional means, and be sure to be able to, advocate for that when you're on site and say, hey, this is damaged.
Yeah. Okay. So that's all really good information. So for you guys listening, I mean, you'll be able to download this podcast and listen to that stuff again. So if you feel like that was quick and you didn't catch it all, well, just rewind and go back and take your notes. So all of that kind of being said, these are some of the key factors we're looking for and kind of what they mean. How are some of the ways that these things actually affect the sales process itself?
So, once you get more familiar with, how the deductibles and how the endorsements are going to affect the bottom line for what they can get paid for, you can have a more realistic conversation with your insured about what their maximum benefit's going to be in this claim. And then it's more of a conversation about either A, you got to figure out a way to come up with a certain percentage of this. B, we're going to have to figure out a way to make this work by pulling money from somewhere else. Or C, you tell them, based on your coverages, there's a pretty big deficit here, and you might be better off just doing this on a retail basis and, saving yourself the headache of filing a claim. And I know that a lot of contractors have financing options available where they can, provide financing to insureds. But if you're coming in as the expert, the real sales benefit is coming in and giving them a realistic picture of what's going on and not trying to set unrealistic expectations. I mean, if you're the one contractor sales guy or gal that comes in and knocks and says, hey, let's take a look at your policy. And there's some serious considerations in this policy that are going to affect your maximum insured benefit in this instance. Here's some other options for you. They're a little bit more painful from what you have to come out of pocket, but it's usually going to be a little bit quicker. And it's going to be more cut and dry because you're not dealing with a third party, making you jump through a bunch of hoops to get your money. And if the money's not there anyhow, you're jumping through a bunch of hoops to not get any money. And at that point, if you're a contractor, you've wasted your time, and the insured's frustrated and they're still sitting with a busted roof. Right.
No, it's a very good point. Okay. So then is there more than one right way to approach addressing these factors, or is it like you're going to have to do it this way, or are there multiple strategies you can use for addressing, or is it like A plus C equals B?
I mean, it's really coming out of pocket in part, or just doing it retail, I think, are the two best ways to address it when there are policy deficiencies. And it really comes down to what you can do as a contractor too. I mean, if you're the one that's coming in, you see an ACV endorsement and a high deductible, and you can narrow down, what their best day is with regard to what they're going to get from their insurance carrier, you can have an intelligent conversation with say, hey, here's what we can do, with materials and with, our pricing. Here's how we can help you out. Here's what your financial responsibility might end up being here. Like, give them brackets, things like that. But just having that knowledge, I think would, differentiate you significantly as a contractor from most of the people that they're interacting with.
Yeah.
And, in my experience, just as a public adjuster reviewing policies and setting expectations with clients, they appreciate it a heck of a lot more when you give them, the straight dish instead of, giving them unrealistic expectations or high hopes about what they can get when it's just not there.
Yeah. And, the other major one is when you set those expectations for what's going to happen and how it's going to happen, and then it happens that way. Like, you talk about really reinforcing how your client feels about you and your expertise, but man, you can't set those expectations if you don't know what you're talking about. So when you say, oh, well, this is going to happen and this is going to happen and this is going to happen, and then all of a sudden that's exactly what happens and how it goes. Like, even if it goes sideways, like even if you set the expectation that this might go south because of these factors that we have here, and then it does, your client's like, well, he told me that this might happen like this.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And it sets yourself apart as an expert, in the industry to say, hey, I can't advocate for coverage one way or the other, but I can look at your policy and I can give you an idea of what practical implication these endorsements and this deductible are going to have on your ability to get this work done. And
sorry, go ahead.
No. And, it's the time of it. So, you can look at it and say, hey, we can get X amount of dollars. It's a percentage of what we need to do the full work, but it's going to take us a long time. If you want to endeavor on that, that's great, because every dollar you get towards doing this work is awesome. But, how valuable is your time, and, how quickly do you want to get this done? And to come in there and offer options, to your point, is huge too, because they get so many people that, knock on their door or come and talk to them and say, this is how you do it. I'm going to meet your adjuster. It's going to get paid for it. We're going to do the work. There might be some supplements. You're going to write us the checks, and then we're all done. But it rarely ever works that way. And what we're seeing is more increasingly there's, little tricks and poison pills placed into all these policies that prevent, getting indemnified for, specifically wind and hail. I mean, primarily wind and hail, because there's so much of it now. They're finding ways to write it out of policies.
Right. Exactly. Okay. So let's get kind of practical here on this. Some tips for, let's say I'm a sales guy and I'm like, all right, I did what Taylor said. I went out, I did some research. I earned some credibility and some confidence from the client. Client gave me their insurance policy to take a look at. I'm reading through this thing, and now I need to communicate and translate a little with the customer what's going on here. Do you have some tips and some advice for how salespeople can talk about this that's not going to land them in trouble?
Yeah, so you can read policy, and it's made to be written at a 5th grade reading level. Anyone can read it, and you can look at it and tell people what their coverages are, and they should know as well. But you can tell them what that means within the context of the claim. So say it's a roof claim. Let's use a round number. It's a $100,000 roof. You're looking at the declarations page, and you're estimating in your head. You're like, oh, it's, this looks like it's about $100,000. You look at their policy, they have a 5% wind and hail deductible. So immediately you go, so let's say the total insured value is $100,000. You have a 5% wind and hail deductible. Immediately you're going, okay, your responsibility for deductible is $5,000. So, that drops your total insured value down to $95,000. The roof is totaled, and it's just the roof. And the roof is, we'll say, $20,000. And it has an ACV endorsement for a roof over 10 years old. So it's a 30-year shingle, $20,000. You're getting, best day, maybe $10,000 to $15,000 less your $5,000 deductible. So by the depreciation on the top end and the deductible on the bottom end, you've seriously limited the amount of financial indemnification you have to work with to replace the $20,000 roof. You might have half the money all said and done with the insured coming out of pocket for their deductible. So if you can game plan it and give them a prognosis like that when you're on site, just to look at their policy and say, hey, I'm spitballing, the roof costs this much, your deductible is going to be this much. And when it's depreciated, our best day, we're getting 50 to 75 cents on the dollar for these materials. It doesn't give us a whole lot of money to work with to do your roof. So we're either going to have to, find a way to finance it, or maybe do it as a retail job, and you can figure out pricing that way. And then they don't have to go through the headache of filing a claim, sitting around waiting for their adjuster to come out, going back and forth and bandying about, how much this costs, or, supplements, things like that. And, they can just get the thing done. And it offers you a segue into that realm as well.
Okay. That's good. That's good. Now there's a really cool, we're going to talk about something else that's super cool to me. We're going to talk about building credibility, which I love. That's a real big key to any sales strategy, no matter what you're doing. But then we're also going to talk about strategy. So one of the things that you said that you want to get some of the word out here is how to build credibility through building a strategy around approaching this. But before we do that, we're going to give a little more love to some of our sponsors out there. Please, when you see our sponsors, go check out their websites. Go take a look at them. They are literally allowing us to bring this kind of super cool, helpful, and powerful education information to you. So go give them a little love. Reach out to those folks and talk to them about what they do and how they do that and how it can help you, because they want to help you as well. They're already doing it here. So we'll be right back.
You're not using Hill Trace, it's definitely worth the money. That money invested one sale was already bought. We've got from denied or declined 2 actually being bought just because of Hill Trace and the storm reports that they give us.
Not only do I know where the storm's at, sometimes as they're happening, and I can already head right there to the storm, but also after the fact, when I'm out knocking on doors, I can show homeowners the map and what kind of hail was in their area.
We've seen a huge return on our investment, and I have no doubt that you will too.
Welcome back to Contractor Radio. We are sitting here talking about insurance policies and how they affect your sales process with Taylor Bezek from C3 Group. So, Taylor, we kind of teased everybody just a little bit before the commercial break about building credibility through strategy. So what exactly do you mean by that?
I mean, I really think it's the old adage, do what you say, or say what you mean and do what you say. So it's setting good expectations, realistic expectations, and then following through on those. I mean, what we always tell people is, as public adjusters, we are going to put together the best estimate that we can. We're going to represent it to your insurance carrier the best that we can within the context of your policy, meaning, we're going to make sure that every coverage that you're afforded is going to be accounted for, and every piece of damage that we can, reasonably credit to the peril claimed, we're going to put in our estimate. And everything we put in our estimate is, it's code, it's accompanied by a photo, and then we do what we say we're going to do. And we're honest. We're like, we're not the ones holding the checkbook here. Your insurance carrier is. And as good of a job as we can do on our side, there's still the very frequent instance where they tell us to go pound sand. And, setting those expectations up front with the insured to say that we're not the ones that are ultimately writing the check. And there might be an instance where we have to take secondary, courses of action in the form of, appraisal or litigation, possibly. We want to avoid that because we pride ourselves in being able to settle these claims without having to go that route. But we want to make it clear that when it gets to that point, you as an insured have some skin in the game. And that's where the credibility comes from. And where I see that, with contractors too, is, just setting good, realistic expectations with people and saying, hey, I'm going to do my best to advocate for what I think needs to be done to repair the damage here. But, at the end of the day, the policy is the primary governing document for how you get paid and how I ultimately get paid. And I can't change your policy. I can't interpret your policy. I can't, talk coverage on site. I have to stay in my lane. And my lane is really, putting roofs on, putting siding on, repairing your home, bringing you back to pre-loss condition. But it's up to your insurance carrier to give us the funds to do that. And I think, far too often, and, probably not any of the contractors that watch this show or listen here, but far too often, you have salespeople that, in the pursuit of getting ink on paper and getting that contract signed, they make some misrepresentations about, what the latitude of their ability is to effectuate change in a claim. And, we run into it, unfortunately, quite a bit where, we get referred a claim from a contractor and we have to go reset expectations. And, when we're trying to be, the stakeholder quarterback for the insured, the contractor, and the insurance carrier, sometimes those are difficult conversations to have, to be like, well, I understand they told you this, but in reviewing your policy or in reviewing what's actually going on and reviewing the condition of your property, here's what we think is the best possible outcome. And we're going to work our tails off to achieve that for you. But back to your point, sorry, I kind of went on a tangent there, but back to your point about building credibility through strategy, it's being an expert and understanding what the process is and what the variables at play are, and knowing, taking a look at a property and, consulting with a client and giving them an accurate picture of what their best day and their worst day is and what the timelines are going to be and all that.
Yeah. So as it pertains to building out a strategy for dealing with the details of some of these policy, is this something that you would recommend? Is this something that gets tailored with each and every individual client? Like we're going to need to build a strategy for Mrs. Smith or Mr. and Mrs. Smith because of their policy, or is this more of something that you can build templates for your people based on certain factors?
Yeah, so I think it's more of the latter. I think generally the strategy is the same. It's just, again, going back to understanding, what the practical application of a policy and what your limits are when you're approaching a new client, and just giving them, again, a realistic expectation of what's going to happen. And once you understand that, you have a certain set of, set of information that you want to collect prior to endeavoring on, recommending someone file a claim, which, it should ultimately be the insured's decision, but, you don't want to ever recommend someone file a claim without knowing what their coverages are and, that they're going to be able to be indemnified for that loss. But it's, obviously looking at the damage, understanding that, it happened recently, looking at the policy or some portion of the policy that outlines the coverage, and then, making sure that the insured is, willing to have some skin in the game at the end of the day. Because that's the other variable is, your client is not a passive participant in this process ever.
At least they shouldn't be. Yeah.
No, definitely not. I mean, they are, especially if you're, in a contractor insured relationship, they're the one driving the ship and they're your biggest advocate to make sure that you get what you need to do the work as well. And you can help them weaponize information and give the right information to the insurance company to come around and, take things into consideration.
Maybe utilize information. Leverage weapon. I don't know if we want to use it. Where Braden cut that out. So how many different so let's say that I'm a sales manager and I got my team in front of me and we kind of want to create some templated strategies, right? We're like, okay, well, if you see this in there, then we're going to do this. If you see that in there, then we're going to do this. How many different strategies should we be expecting to kind of get lined out for our sales team?
I can't speak to, every contractor and what their abilities are to, make things work or, finance certain things. But
sure.
But really what you want to come down to is, understanding what the, if you walk up and it's a full RCV policy, no crazy endorsements, everything looks good, I would say run it the normal way, obviously. Just say, hey, you've got good damage, good policy, recent storm, client ready to go, sign it up and run it the traditional way, the way that it's supposed to go. Meet the adjuster, get it paid for, and then, do the work. Obviously, if you see a deductible, that's a conversation you have to have about, hey, are you able to pay your deductible in a wind and hail situation? Say it is 5% and it's X amount of dollars. Just prepare them for that.
And have that conversation. Sorry to interrupt you, but have that conversation up front. It's like, a lot of salespeople, and I see salespeople do this, they shy away from that conversation because they think that conversation, they just kind of hoping that the customer is just expecting to pay their deductible and they know what it is and everything's just going to be all good. We don't want to do that. You want to attack that conversation immediately, because I tell you what, it's a whole lot easier to discover that your customer's expectations on that deductible and what you know should happen are different. It's a lot easier to walk away from that situation when you've only been talking to them for like 20 or 30 minutes rather than we've got 2 or 3, 4 hours into this project and they expected you to cover their deductible or they didn't know it was at 5%. Don't be afraid of that conversation at all.
Yeah, because it's your time and your time is your money, especially as a salesperson. I mean, every hour that you sink into a claim that ultimately isn't going to bear fruit on the back end is an hour lost and an hour that you could be spending out getting more business. So yes, Nathan, to your point, have that conversation up front. And then, the other endorsements like the ACV endorsements or cosmetic endorsements, if you see a cosmetic endorsement and you're dealing with a metal roof, if it's not significant damage and a really large roof, I mean, to substantiate cosmetic damage on a roof is pretty cost intensive. I mean, I can flat out say that carriers, the spirit of those endorsements is that carriers are not going to pay unless there's a hole through it or there's dents to the seams or water's getting in clearly and it's new from a recent storm. So that's a conversation to have. And it might not be worth pursuing at that point as a salesperson without, a public adjuster or an attorney, because those are the people that are going to be able to make those nuanced legal arguments, or the attorneys will be able to make legal arguments. The public adjuster will be able to make nuanced policy arguments to maybe get around the definition of functionality versus cosmetic that you can't, those are explicitly the conversations that you can't have. But that's another conversation to have with your insured. You see that endorsement, you go, oh, this is beyond my ability to advocate for on site. I'm sorry, that's just what it is. You may need a public adjuster or an attorney to help you out if you really want to pursue replacement of this roof. And through that conversation, you might find out with your insured that they don't. They're like, well, I had another contractor say that it was damaged. I needed a new roof. So you're the second guy and I'm talking to you. Thanks for the information. And from that conversation, you might say, hey, yeah, has anyone else here brought up that you have this endorsement? And I'm like, no one's even asked about my policy. And that builds credibility right there to say, hey, I've done enough of this to know that this type of material with this type of damage typically is subject to this type of endorsement. And that endorsement is very difficult to overcome. And I cannot, with my ability as a contractor, overcome said endorsement.
Right. Right. Prepare them for that, ask the question, this is kind of the situation that we're in. And are you up for a fight? Because
absolutely
they're probably going to put one up. And if you're thinking, no, I'm not, well, then let's know that now. I don't want to waste the time of the client. If the client's like, if they reject it, I'm not going to do anything. Okay, well, great. I don't blame you, but let's figure out what that course of action looks like now.
Yeah. And all of these conversations are qualifiers with your client or your insured to see, how adamant they are about fixing the damage, because everyone knows there's a spectrum. There's some people that are, very, very adamant that they want to get the roof replaced or their building envelope repaired. And there's some that are like, yeah, it'd be great if it did, but I'm really not expecting it to go through. And those are the people that, really you need to have these conversations with up front. Say there's an ACV endorsement for the roof and it's a 15-year-old roof on a 30-year shingle. And you go to them and you say, hey, your best day, you're getting 50% of what this roof is worth. Are you, it's obviously damaged, it needs to be fixed. Are you able to assume the cost of the other 50% to bring this roof back to pre-loss condition with the material that's up there? Would you like to switch to a different material that's maybe less cost intensive but will lower your insured value? Or do you want to just let it sit? Or do you want to finance it all outright and not go through the claims process at all? And, when you see that type of endorsement, any endorsement that, negatively affects the amount of indemnification that someone gets, you really need to have a serious conversation about how adamant they are to do the work and what their ability is to finance it or willingness to secure third party financing through you as a contractor to do it.
And, it's a really tricky thing too, because honestly, homeowners get their backs up against the wall quite a bit. They decide that they don't want to do anything about that damage, and the life of their roof is now going to probably be significantly shorter, but they're not going to be able to make a claim on it when it does wear out, and that wear and tear may be a result of some damage. So
Yes.
It's good to make them aware. Like, if you don't do anything about this and your roof wears out, you don't get to call them. You'll be paying out of pocket one way or another. So, that's part of that strategy question.
Yeah. And it will be, and if you don't do anything, it'll definitely be uninsured the next time something happens. Because, if say you call in a claim and they come out and they look at it and they deny it, there is damage, but they're saying, hey, it's not functional damage, yada, 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 we're not paying for it. And you sit there and rather than fight it as an insured and say, you know what, I'm just not going to do anything. I'm not going to worry about it. Well, fast forward, 2 years down the road, you have another significant event, another significant hailstorm, and it severely damages the roof. Well, they come out and they say, oh, well, this is all old damage, or it was damaged before, but it was never taken care of. And as BS as that is, it happens all the time where they deny a claim and then they come back out when another claim happens and say that the claim that they denied is the reason why the roof is shot and not the new damage. So we've seen it, more often than we like. But it's a fact. And the other side of that is that there's, a 2-year statute of limitations written into pretty much every policy for your ability as an insured or an insured's ability to file suit against their carrier. And while most people don't end up filing suit against their carrier, that provision and that 2-year window is, leverage over the carrier to act in good faith and act constructively to resolve a loss. Because once that 2-year window eclipses, they know they have no recourse that they're facing if you're upset with the resolution of that loss. So as soon as 2 years elapses and you haven't filed suit or settled the claim, they don't have any incentive to work constructively with you as an insured or you as a contractor at all.
That's a really key point that contractors should understand inside and out, because if you truly want to service your client, okay, looking at their policy and them having damage, whether it's enough or not enough, at the end of the day, it all still lands on their property, and the condition of their property lands on them as a property owner. And so you are not doing them any good by simply going, oh, well, and walking away. They need to understand the ramifications of doing that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, we're seeing it now in Iowa specifically. Most policies have a 1-year provision, which is, in terms of an insurance claim is a relatively short amount of time, especially if there's any sort of reasonable dispute, especially when you're in a global pandemic. You thought things moved slow before. The last year, everything was at a snail's pace, but none of the provisions changed. We were fortunate where, you can get tolling agreements and verbal extensions, things like that will extend benefits under the policy. But, 1 year is a small snapshot, especially on larger claims where you have, a reasonable dispute. And in places like Colorado, where we haven't had a significant hailstorm in a couple of years, we've had small ones here and there, but, the large part of the Front Range, the Denver Metro, most of Colorado Springs hasn't had a major storm in a few years now. So there's a lot of contractors out there that are, pursuing claims that are aged, 9 months, 12 months, 15 months past the date of loss. And, it's not a very good use of your time to be, soliciting, signing, and, working on, putting together an estimate or documenting damage, ordering materials when, it's past the 2-year statute and the insurance carrier has no interest in paying due to late notice and it being beyond 2 years.
Right. So sharpen up, contractors. There's still opportunity there. They still need a roof replaced, man. And so
Absolutely.
it may not come down to insurance money. Now you got to be a real salesperson. Oh no. You also wanted to talk a little bit about the concept of understanding policy ROI, obviously return on investment. What exactly do you mean by that?
I think the main point of that is the time invested, being efficient with your time as a salesperson. I mean, we do it as public adjusters, and as a contractor, I think you can be very savvy with, the claims that you decide to take, and be very, discretionary with what you want to take based on, doing a simple cursory review of someone's policy. Because like I said before, your time is your money. And every hour you sink into talking some insured into, signing on the dotted line, when ultimately it's not going to bear fruit from an indemnification standpoint, is an hour lost that you could be going out and, soliciting and signing more deals. And that's what I mean by ROI. And it's a twofold. It's, you're going to make sure that you're building the credibility and you're maximizing your margins with regard to, what the policy affords, and you're going to understand what the policy affords. The insured's going to be happy because they're going to know what to expect and what their policy affords and what their financial responsibility is in the claims process. And if it's a bad policy, you can say, hey, I'm sorry, but I don't think it's here. And unless you want to do it on a retail basis or front a significant portion of this job, it's really not a smart business move for my company to endeavor on working on your behalf to try to get a resolution to this claim. Okay. So, I always say you see so many guys running around with trucks that say insurance specialist on them, start
really,
start understanding, the policy. And I know that most contractors do have a pretty good cursory knowledge of what, a declarations page reads and what it means and what ACV means and what, certain endorsements, imply for a claim. But to be able to sit there with an insured and accurately, lay out what you think their best day and their worst day is, and what that means for the feasibility of getting this work done, either all through insurance, none through insurance, some through insurance, that's really helpful. And, I think you'll find that you get a lot more business that way by being the different contractor that comes in and actually, has a realistic conversation about that stuff.
Yeah. So in analyzing like the ROI on a policy as you're trying to go through this thing, are there varying degrees of ROI, or is it like do it, don't do it?
Yes, there are. And it's case by case, really. And it's going back and looking at, again, I don't mean to beat a dead horse, but look at your deductible, make sure that your insured can afford that deductible. Look at the endorsements and make sure that those endorsements aren't going to put you in a place that when they get the maximum amount they can for the damage that's claimed, you're not at an upside down net leader where you're either trimming your margins so thin that if one thing goes wrong, you're in the red on the job, or that, they can't come out of pocket to help you out a little bit. Because if they're not interested in doing that and it's going to put you in that position, that might not be a job you want to sink too much time into. Because again, the other side of it is that the more complicated these policies get, and, when you're starting to try to, massage the numbers and move money around to rob Peter to pay Paul to get the job done, those are more hours you're spending on trying to figure out how to do this work. And maybe those hours aren't worth the payout at the end. And being able to identify that, I think, is the biggest way to, maximize your ROI. And that's what I think it means to use a policy-driven sales approach, because that's the other side of the fence. The damage is there. It has to get fixed, but now you got a client and a policy that are, where the money's coming from. And if the policy isn't giving you the money and the client's not going to give you the money, and you probably shouldn't be taking that job.
Mm-hmm. So what do you guys see as contractors' biggest mistakes that they make? Like, if somebody's listening to this and they're like, man, I think I'm doing this right, but I don't want to step on any landmines. What are the things that you guys are like, look, here's like the top things you need to really watch out for and try not to do?
I would just say setting bad expectations from a time standpoint, timelines, because, what I see is that, you can only control what you can control. And at the end of the day, the insurance company is the one holding the checkbook, specifically in an insurance claim instance. So, setting good expectations from a time standpoint with these clients, because oftentimes by the time a public adjuster gets involved, the insured is just so disillusioned and fired up and, just not happy with how long it's taken. And while we as public adjusters and, you guys as contractors deal with this every day, this might be the first or second time this person's dealing with it.
Right.
So, just that side of it, to say, hey, we're going to do our best to expedite this process and get you brought back to pre-loss condition as fast as possible. But know that a lot of this is out of our control. We're contractors. If we have the money, we'll put the roof on tomorrow. We'll put the siding on tomorrow. We'll redo the windows next week. But the problem is that, if the money's not there, you can't do the work. It gets protracted and it gets longer. So I think setting good time expectations is
That's
one.
a good one.
And then the other big mistake I see a lot of, and again, none of this is, universal through all contractors. There's a lot of good contractors that know just as much or more than I do about all this stuff, but it's reducing the process down to being overly simple, I think is another big one. Again, as public adjusters, we get brought in a lot, and, I always have a consult and expectation setting call with my clients. And I say, here's what we're going to do. It could go this way. It could go that way. It's very contingent and subjective on your insurance carrier on whether or not they want to work constructively with us. And I go into painful detail about, all of the things, all of the ways and variables that a claim can go. And, I see a lot of contractors that just do hey, sign it up. We'll get it paid for. You'll have a roof on. It'll be easy. And it rarely is. And the other, I'll say this one, this is kind of facetious, but the third mistake is using the term slam dunk too much. It's like getting a tattoo of your
slam dunk.
It's like getting a tattoo of your girlfriend. As soon as you say that, it's not going to be a slam dunk. Every time I hear the term slam dunk, it becomes the most, biggest, it's the biggest can of worms ever. So don't use slam dunk.
Yeah. Stop saying that. Don't say slam dunk anymore. That's funny. Well, cool, man. So, are you willing and able to help some of these guys develop some of these strategies if they reach out and have some questions for you?
Absolutely. And that's, I never want to be salesy, but, and not that you would ever need to use C3 for this, but if you have questions or can get your hands on a policy, I know that pretty much any public adjuster will, do a review for you and let you know like what certain endorsements mean, how that'll affect, a claim situation. And if you want to, completely save yourself from any exposure or anything like that, we're always happy to review anything, even if it's not something that we would be interested in taking on, or we don't think it's a good fit for us. We want to be a resource for contractors. We want to make sure that, contractors are successful, and we want to make sure that you guys all stay in business, because at the end of the day, that's where public adjusters get our work from. It's contractors. And, we rely on contractors a lot for, technical information on, the way stuff should get built back, things like that. And, we want to empower you guys to be able to sell efficiently and effectively, and, be the experts for your clients that, that they want you to be.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're happy to look at anything and give you our 2 cents for what it's worth.
That's awesome. So if somebody wanted a little help from you, how do they get a hold of you?
So I don't know if you're going to share, you can share my email with this podcast. It's Taylor, that's TAYLOR at c3adjusters.com. And if you can't get a hold of me, Jason Quimby is our business development guy. And he's also very adept at, looking at this stuff and taking it in and, giving the 2 cents on whether or not he thinks is good. And his email is Jason, that's JASIN at c3adjusters.com. Awesome. Well,
I'm going to be right back after a word from our sponsors for a quick parting shot. Thank you so much, Taylor. Really appreciate you taking some time to educate us and give us some good information from kind of that sales side rather than the administrative and back end side. in dealing with policies on the upfront, man. I really appreciate you taking your time to do that with us today.
Absolutely, man. Nathan, thanks for having me. I'm always happy to share, some wisdom for what it's worth.
Yeah, absolutely. So cool. Well, we're going to catch a word from our sponsors, and we will be right back.
Who doesn't love getting more referrals? GTR will make your referral game stronger than ever with our 4-step process. First, engage with customers through job status updates and push notifications. Then, motivate your advocates to send referrals and earn rewards. Third, track and manage all of your results through your company's dashboard. And finally, sit back and enjoy achieving up to 40 times ROI. GTR is the #1 referral platform for contractors, so book your demo today at getthereferral.com.
Thank you guys so much for joining us with this episode of Contractor Radio. We hope you found that information interesting. My major takeaways here were learn policies, and then work getting your hands on those policies into your sales process. Make it part of what you do. Create some scripts or some tactics on how we can look at those policies from our customers so that we can analyze them and then help them with their strategies so we can build credibility and then we can understand the ROI that those policies have. The next big takeaway, expectations. Anytime something doesn't go the way that you expected or the way that you told them it would, it's kind of a chip against your credibility and your experience with that customer. So let's understand what those expectations should be and then set those with our clients. All right, guys, we will see you next time on our next edition of Contractor Radio. Thanks for joining us.